Here's two options. There's three options, of course. A 50-state basically saying you can't deny the right of a person to marry someone of their own gender. The other option is to say basically if you're going to go to civil unions, you can't deny the label marriage. You can't give all the rights but deny the honor or the celebration of the actual relationship publicly. And the first one is the one it looks like he's heading towards, which is to say you can't take away a right once given. Once recognized, given, but once recognized.
Right. That was
California.
That was the ruling that the Ninth Circuit gave, essentially, which is gays and lesbians had the right to be married. Proposition 22 was passed, and it was adjudicated at the California Supreme Court, and the California Supreme Court said that gays and lesbians have a constitutional right to marry. That's when Gavin started holding wedding ceremonies. And then Proposition 8 took away that right that was given by the Supreme Court. So that's the argument that the Ninth Circuit gave.
And Chris, the significance of that narrow frame of reference, it was also written, from my perspective, to appeal to Justice Kennedy, who had previously adjudicated in a 6-3 decision, writing that majority opinion in the Romer versus Colorado.
And the children impact. Let's get human here.
The children finally
40,000 children now of same-sex couples in your state.
And it was finally bringing the human element in this case. In academic terms, we can talk in legalese, but we're talking about human beings here. And to Justice Kennedy's credit, that was the first time we connected it to what Rob and others were just mentioning. This is about human dignity, self-worth. This is about human rights, civil rights. And to bring the children back in was a good reminder of what's at stake here. It's not just a legal brief. This is about people. This is their brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, mothers, and their sons and daughters.
You've said it. You say it on that promo that you do it. I see it all the time on MSNBC. The beautiful thing about this country, anytime we talk about expanding rights and giving people rights, we do the right thing ultimately. Eventually we do. Yes, eventually we do the right thing, because the founders of this country had an idea, which is that we should all be considered equal under the law.
Well, it's a bad word to use in this country, but it's a dialectic at work. There's a constant fight between the old know-nothings and the segregationists and the slave owners, and then there were the people against the franchising of women, giving suffrage for women, and every one of those fights the liberals have won eventually.
Yeah, and as Dr. King said,
Progress.
Long march of history bends towards justice.
But finally, in the end, anyway, the opponents of same-sex marriage argued that the main thrust of their opposition had to do with regulating procreation. In a nutshell, they said gay marriage doesn't lead to procreation. Straight marriage does. But Justice Elena Kagan asked, based on that position, what would stop a state from denying marriage licenses to people too old to have children, which happens all the time now? And that led to this exchange. Let's listen.
Your Honor, even with respect to couples over the age of 55, it is very rare that both parties to the couple are infertile. And the traditional
no, really, because if a couple, I can just assure you, if both the woman and the man are over the age of 55, there are not a lot of children coming out of that marriage.
Well, that was a chuckle, but it was a point, Governor. Not everybody marries even with the intent of having children.
No, and people that are incarcerated can get married, so it's perverse. I mean, that's why we got into the sterilization test and whether or not you can sign off on whether or not couples sterile or infertile. It's a preposterous argument, and fundamentally that's the only argument they have, that marriage as an institution is about procreation when we know better. And so Justice Kagan made the right point.
Okay, few doubt where Justice Scalia stands on this question of gay marriage. Well, today he sparred with attorney Ted Olson, who is representing the two gay couples out in California who brought the challenge to Prop 8. Justice Scalia had a rather philosophical question. He asked Ted Olson when exactly it became unconstitutional to deny same-sex couples the right to marry. Listen to this great, typical Scalia exchange.
When did it become unconstitutional to prohibit gays from marrying?
Then they did not assign a date to it, Justice Scalia, as you know. What the court decided was a case that came before.
I'm not talking about the California Supreme Court. I'm talking about your argument. You say it is now unconstitutional.
Yes.
Was it always unconstitutional?
It was constitutional when we, as a culture, determined that sexual orientation is a characteristic of individuals that they cannot control.
I see. When did that happen? When did that
There's no specific date in time. This is an evolution.
How am I supposed to know how to decide a case?
Because the case
you can't give me a date when the Constitution changes.
Answer. When did it become unconstitutional to deny gay couples the right to marry?
The answer is that it was always unconstitutional. Just like it was always unconstitutional to deny women the right to vote. Just as it was always unconstitutional to have slavery.
Why did they change the Constitution so women could vote then?
They changed it because they realized that that was an unconstitutional thing. Yeah. And women fought to
it wasn't consistent with our basic principles.
No, but you've got to remember.
Right.
Wasn't that long President Bush was arguing to change the Constitution to write discrimination into it for a reason. There's something apparently about this Constitution they find offensive because it doesn't.
Well, what do you make of this answer by Ted Olson, who's a pretty smart fellow, making this case? He said it was constitutional when we as a culture determined that sexual orientations and characters of individuals they cannot control. Remember was Trent Lott saying you have to make a decision? Remember they used to have you decide whether you're gay or straight?
Used to be called a disease.
Yeah.
I mean, we've come a long way towards understanding what, who people are and what they are. And as we evolve...
what happens? Tough. You guys are both political in this regard. You're always political. No, you are. I'm not knocking it. It's your profession. If you get a narrow ruling that says Prop 8 has to go, it's unconstitutional because of the children, because it's already been, those people have already been ruled eligible to marry. You can't take back that right. Okay? You don't get the 9 states. You don't get the 50 states. Where does that take this case in the future? Where does it go after this year?
First of all, I think it's important to remind people that means by late June, people can legally get married in the state of California, which is significant.
1/8 of the country.
So that in and of itself is a big victory.
You can marry,
and this guy deserves an extraordinary amount of credit.
So gay people will move to California for sure.
Potentially, but also it creates another case law, and then invariably, and this is going to be the challenge for this court. There's going to be other cases that will invariably make their way to the Supreme Court.
So this is progress.
We did 2 things, and the reason we brought this case was to do 2 things. One was to prove that Prop 8 was unconstitutional. The second thing was to use this as an educational time, an educational moment to let people know. That's why Lance Black, who won an Oscar for Milk, wrote a play called 8, which was based on the proceedings that happened in that district court. And if you look at that play, and the more and more you know about the issue, the more and more we see the needle swing. When we started, we were in the 40s. Now we're at 58. People under the age of 30,
that's profound.
81% believe that gays should be allowed to marry.
It's not right or left anymore.
Picked up John Tester today from Montana.
I know.
Amazing development. Anyway, as we all argue, these are progressive, and in the end, the liberals win. Thank you, Rob Reiner. Great man. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
We call you Governor, by the way. Someday it'll be fully true. Coming out, why gay marriage advocates.